Three, two, one. Hello, Nikki. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Perfect. So, for anybody listening, Nikki has been working in the field of English and Spanish, I suppose, for a very long time. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. So I'm Nikki Lubing, owner of Skillabration Foreign Language School. We have an online foreign language school that takes students learning language skills from zero to fuego. Fuego is fire, if you didn't know. And right now we're offering French, Spanish, and Mandarin at our school. And before I had Skillabration, I was a public school teacher from 2005 to 2016. And like you said, I had a mix of experience between Spanish and English as a second language. I taught some middle school, some high school. And then in 2016, I said, you know what? I want more freedom and creativity in my life. So that's when I started the online teaching with ESL actually to the Chinese. And then later after that is when I moved into Spanish again and then founded Skillabration. So
And have you seen any, or maybe what would you say have been the greatest benefits that you've noticed from moving, like you said, from the public schooling system to doing your own thing, essentially?
one of the benefits is obviously the freedom to teach the way that I see fit for the students and have that creativity. But it's just a really interesting experience developing the entrepreneurial spirit. I think that was a spirit I didn't really, I was probably always in the back of my mind, it was there. I always knew I wanted to do something with leadership, but I don't think I knew it was going to be my own business. So that was something I discovered along the way. And then meeting people like you. I never would have been meeting, yeah, like you talk to people all over the world when you do online teaching. I've made so many friends in different countries, different parts of the US and different Canada, Mexico, North America in general, and then Europe. It's amazing to have so many, not just friends, but also students. Like I said, I have a student from Poland right now. I've had students from the UK, and it's a great experience. So
You're very right. I think, or at least for me, this was something that I kind of knew because, well, of course, it's online, so anybody can join, right? But then it really hits you when you start doing it that, oh, a person from this part of the world and this part of the world, and oh, tell me what your day looks like, what your habits are, what you celebrate, and what your Christmas looks like. And it's such an incredible experience of gaining that knowledge of not just like you said, I'm here, I'm local, this is what I know, but you have the entire world at your fingertips for sure. Definitely. And on
exactly.
the flip side of that, has there been anything that you haven't particularly enjoyed?
I would say it's not that I haven't enjoyed it, but there's a huge learning curve for
Hmm.
entrepreneurship. It's I'm always learning something. Sometimes, if you ever talk to other entrepreneurs, there's peaks and there's valleys. So sometimes those valleys can hit hard. You have to have a lot of perseverance and determination when you're running your own business. So if it's something you're thinking about doing, just know that that's part of it for everybody. I'm trying to think if there's anything else, logistically, sometimes with the internet, it could be like I don't have a lot of problems with the internet, but one solution I found was a mesh Wi-Fi network. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's it's basically like you're setting up your own little pod and it connects from your modem. And my office is in the basement, so it took me a couple years to actually find the solution for my internet.
Wow.
So it's just like I said, it's learning those little things along the way. There can be those types of frustrations, but if you are if you're somebody that really likes to serve a community and if you're somebody that really wants that freedom and creativity in your life, then entrepreneurship could be something for you if that's something you're considering as a teacher. So,
I'd love to develop what you said before with your leadership, that that's always that something that you saw yourself in, but you didn't know that it would manifest as a business owner. And what would you say have been the biggest lessons that you've learned in terms of, okay, this is what I thought leadership is, this is what I now realize it actually is?
Well, I did have some experience with leadership before I quit the public school system. I was a mentor and trainer in the middle school where I worked. Being bilingual and working with students who are learning English, I did have to co-teach quite a bit. So I did have some experience with teaching other teachers how to teach English as a second language. It's not something that everybody gets training in. So that was something that I took on, and then I eventually I became like the go-to person that people would come and ask me questions about how to teach English and what to do, and all the different things. So I did have some experience with that, but now with running Skillabration, um, I'm playing a lot more roles, not just like the owner of the company, but I'm the HR manager, the human resources manager. So that's probably the main thing I'm doing right now. And oddly enough, in college, I was an HR assistant. So I wasn't I
Perfect.
wasn't doing the interviewing and stuff, but I can't believe all these different things that like play into what I'm doing now.
No,
It's crazy. But just, when I was doing HR, I was probably more doing like the filing, the paperwork, the computer aspects with payroll. But now, I'm doing the interviewing, I'm doing the actual hiring. Well, it's contracting. I'm not hiring employees, but looking at the contracts, all that stuff. So I don't remember what your question was, but oh, about leadership. So yeah, it's take putting on all these different hats. Um, so that's the name of the game is playing different roles until you get to a certain point where you can hire somebody else to fill that role. That's
for
the
sure.
goal.
Definitely. And that's a wonderful point. Like you said, that with leadership, it's not that, okay, I am this person and this is what I do, but you have to be somebody different for everybody that you work with almost that. And especially as a teacher, I mean, you can't, or we don't treat everybody in the same way, which maybe sounds, I don't know, lack of equality or something like that. But everybody has different needs, and you can't possibly. And I suppose this is something that maybe, and this is something that we briefly talked about last time as well, but the issue with the public system or the mainstream education system, that you have 30 or however many kids in one classroom and they're all getting the exact same treatment, the exact same information, where one might be already here, another one is here, and neither of them are benefiting. And it's just not a very good mix.
Yeah, yeah, it's
So
amazing how what we have now with technology and how we can reach people far and wide in education and other ways too. It's I mean, this is definitely like technological revolution. So we're right in the midst of it.
it certainly is, yeah. And I'd love to also get to your Spanish speaking, and again, we briefly mentioned this last time, but can you, to anybody listening, can you walk us through how that started for you?
Learning or having an interest in learning Spanish.
Sure.
So I my family went on some just family vacations to Mexico when I was a kid. It's pretty common in the US to travel to Mexico, but at that time, we're talking like 1991, 92, it wasn't quite as common yet. So we were probably some of the first tourists in Cancun, and it was a lot smaller back then. Um, but when I heard Spanish, and just this was just sitting, by the poolside, hearing the guys, the servers talking to each other. I was like, I really want to be a part of that conversation. And I was only 7, 8 years old at the time, but it planted a seed. And from then on, it was just something, and we kept going back to Mexico every year. So from then on, I was just like, I got to become fluent in Spanish. Now, when I was growing up, we didn't have programs like they have now right now there's dual language programs where you
Mm.
are immersed in Spanish from day one, from kindergarten. You have to apply to get into the programs like that. But I know if I was little, it's probably what I would have done. But we didn't have that option. My very first Spanish class was 8th grade, like, and it was just like the first teacher that our middle school had. Um, so it was pretty basic Spanish. And then I went into high school Spanish and I did 4 years there. So at that point, when I was doing high school Spanish, I was like, okay, I need to study abroad. I need to go major in Spanish in college. So that's the steps I took. I then went to Mexico, outside of Mexico City. I stayed with a family for 6 weeks. So I got a real good cultural experience. They spoke English to me, but it's probably more beneficial to them. But they're still friends of mine. I still talk with some of the family that I stayed with. And then I majored in it in college and then got my teaching certification in Spanish and then later ESL. So,
Would you say that your, let's say, learning journey would you say that the most significant roots of your learning have been in that, like you said, that middle school, high school, or would you say that, like you said, that was a little bit too basic and you only, quote unquote, really started learning when you did your studies, further studies?
so I had two different Spanish teachers in high school. And one of the Spanish teachers, I would say she was my inspiration, my mentor. I still talk to her to this day. We're friends on
Oh,
Facebook. So I even asked her, like, do you remember how you taught XYZ? Like how to roll your R's in Spanish. I ended up doing what she said. Like I was like, "Oh yeah, that's what it was." So I did a video on it. I did a YouTube short on it and it exploded. Like there's like over 40,000 views on it. I was like, "That's so cool."
nice.
Like to have from back in the day, I have this
Hmm.
relationship with her now and then taking that and putting it out there in this modern age. And yeah, it's just really cool to see that those roots are from my teacher and then I shared
Yeah.
it out with the world. So yeah, but and I've gotten all these comments like, "Oh, I know how to roll my R's now." It's like so cool, like that trickle effect. So in any case, yeah, she gave me a really solid foundation. Was lucky to have her for Spanish 1 and Spanish 3. So it's Spanish 1, 2, 3, and 4. I had her freshman year and junior year in high school. And a lot of what she taught me, I take into my classroom today and then of course modify with any new skills I've learned with just along the way with language learning. um, and then in college, like it's such a process with learning a language. So in high school we weren't in like an immersion style, so we were more in the traditional method of learning, which is learn this vocabulary list, learn the grammar, and there wasn't as much speaking and listening. There's only a little bit of it. So, but it set me up for success. I do have to say, like, I have an appreciation for that model because I learned so much about grammar and I understand Spanish and now English as a result of that
Yeah.
because of learning those things about Spanish. So, um, it set me up for success to really know how Spanish functions. And then later, using my speaking when I went into Spain, I studied abroad in Spain. And that's where I would say it all came together. And that's when I started to become fluent. When I was in studying abroad in Spain in 2003, that was like my sophomore year, summer before junior year of college. So it was a process to become fluent. Yeah.
And tell me, Nikki, I'm wondering, what would you say is the biggest issue that you think people are having with Spanish coming to you that, okay, I need to improve X, Y, Z? Or I suppose from your perspective, it might be a little bit different because you also worked with kids, right? So I guess they're not, oh, I want to become fluent. And I guess their goals might be a little bit different. But what do you notice people most struggle with? Do you think it's the pronunciation, the grammar, perhaps something else?
So with Spanish, I would say, or even with any foreign language, what I've seen with kids, because I primarily work with middle school and high school students, And I think the biggest thing for them is speaking. It's not being afraid to take a risk
Mm.
and actually start speaking. Um, and I have a classroom environment where my students feel comfortable to do that. And I promote that. So, but that's probably the biggest thing is like that awkward feeling like, oh man, I feel like a baby again. You know, that's what language learning does to you. But just when you share that with students and let them know that's normal, everyone feels that way, that helps them get past it. Um, Sometimes pronunciation can be a problem, but luckily Spanish is phonetic, and I always
Mm.
remind my students of that too, and teach them how to learn the sounds of Spanish, the vowel sounds, and let them know like, hey, if you just practice the a e o u a e I o u, and then you practice with the consonants ba be bi bo bu ka se si ko ku da de di do do. So teaching them that and how simple it is, and then blending, yeah, it's something that you can resolve is basically what I'm getting at, um, and just providing the encouragement and making the learning fun. Whatever struggle it is, you can make it interesting and fun for your students, and that helps them get past their struggles.
And what's been your experience with your confidence in speaking? Like you said that in your high school, and I suppose this is the experience of most people that, okay, I learned the grammar, I learned the vocab, but what's next? What's been your experience with breaking through that? Oh no, what if I make a mistake? What if I do something wrong? How did you deal with that yourself?
So I think I'm lucky in terms of personality, where I'm always willing to put myself out there and make a fool of myself. I actually remember getting to Spain and like right away speaking Spanish with the people who were like they're from the university. Um, and my friend was like, "Oh my gosh." I was with a friend from college, and she's like, "Man, you just go right into it." I was like, "Yeah, that's what we're here for. Come on."
Yeah.
So, I think I just have such an eagerness or I had at that time, I had such an eagerness to learn, and I didn't care if I made mistakes. In fact, um, I actually got a lower grade in our conversation class compared to my friend, because I spoke so much and made so many mistakes, but then I became fluent. So who cares about, I
That's
got
a
a
good
B, she got
lesson.
an A, like who
Yeah.
cares? Long term, I became fluent. So yeah.
And do you attribute it to putting yourself out there, like you said, making those mistakes? And then how did you fine tune your Spanish? Because I'm assuming when you're, like you said, in Spain or Mexico, it's not, oh, actually, you should say this instead of that. I guess people are not super open to correct foreigners, especially, I would say. So how did you develop that? Okay, I made a mistake here. This is what it should have been.
Um, I think like I don't know, in university, um, I would actually remember, like let's say I sent an email to a professor or something, I would be like an hour, 2 hours later, I would think about what I wrote, and I'm like, "Oh man, that was a mistake." Like I would start to catch my own mistakes along the
Mm.
way. I actually had a friend in college too who was a native Spanish speaker from Mexico, and she and I had we kind of teamed up where I would read her essays and correct them in English, and she would read my essays and correct my mistakes in Spanish. That was so valuable, having her consistently show me my mistakes, because I saw the patterns that way. And so, like,
Mm.
one of the mistakes that I would always make, was with the word it's A-L.
Hmm.
So, um, al hacer, something, whatever it was. Like, I saw that over and over again. So, it just like sometimes you need to see those mistakes over and over again to really start to ingrain it in your mind, long term. It's not just one time where you're going to hear something and then you fix it. You really do have to make the mistake over and over. In terms of like you said about Mexican Spanish versus Spanish from Spain.
Mm,
What's really interesting about that is, in the US, we have a lot of Mexican immigrants, especially where I live in the Chicago area. And so just having friends or just acquaintances growing up, letting them know I was going to Spain, they're like, "You're gonna be so confused because the Spanish in Spain is so different." And I'm like, I get there, I'm like, okay, yeah, there's certain words or whatever that are different. Like, okay, but it's not like a total other language here. It's not like I'm going into Portugal where it's like
right,
totally other, you know. I'm like that people make a big deal out of things that's not that big of a deal, I think. I mean, it's like British English versus American English. There's a difference,
right.
but can I understand you? Yes. Can we communicate? Yes. Do you maybe say jumper instead of sweater? Okay, but I know what you're talking about. Like,
That's your
you know,
problem.
but I know what you're saying. Like, it's not a big deal. I didn't have my issue in Spain was more like actually as soon as I spoke, people would speak English with me instead of
Yeah.
responding to me in Spanish. I think it's just like I don't know if it's like, oh, you don't at the time I kind of thought like, oh, they don't think I'm going to be able to hold a conversation,
Mm.
but looking back they probably just wanted to practice their English, you know? So, yeah, I didn't have too many people correcting me, I don't think, and yeah, that wasn't a thing, I don't think. It was more I think the only time people would correct me would be like if it's a teacher that I asked them to do that. Or like I said, my friend who we did a trade situation with English and Spanish.
I've heard a lot of people complaining about that, oh, I always ask my coworkers to correct me and my friends to correct me, and they never
Okay.
do. And I understand why. I mean, it feels a little
Yeah.
bit awkward, especially like you said, if you're not, let's say, in that teacher position that, okay, I have the authority to tell you that this is a mistake. It may sound a little bit awkwarder for that person. It's not super nice. And I always try
Mhm.
to, like you said, just finding that different perspective to it. That, like you said, it's probably not because they didn't think that I was good enough, but they just probably wanted to practice themselves. And I guess this is the same thing, that it's not that they don't care about you, but they just probably feel awkward. So always
Yeah,
finding that different perspective.
for sure. And I think different cultures are different about that, about the
Mm.
corrections, because having taught English to the Chinese or just Asia in general, I think is a little bit more like um what's the word? They're stricter about corrections. They want to be corrected every single time. Every single time that they make a mistake. Whereas in Western culture, I think it's more like um you kind of tiptoe around it with the students. Like you don't want to discourage them. So if you correct them too much, they're going to start to get discouraged. There's that kind of mentality about it. And actually, teaching Asian students, I've brought that into my Spanish now, where I do correct a lot more often with my students learning Spanish. And I've done it in a way where I don't, I haven't felt that my students feel discouraged at all. And I think it's the environment that I create in the classroom with them and having a rapport with them in order to do that. And I think they've learned appreciation for it. So,
You're very right. Like you said, setting those expectations that, okay, I'm going to correct you, but that doesn't mean that you can't speak and don't ever open your mouth again. But I'm just trying to help you.
yeah,
Certainly, certainly.
exactly.
And I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into what you said with Spain and Mexico, and having lived or having been in both of these places. I'm really wondering how your knowledge of Spanish has helped you understand those cultures. Because being there as an English speaker or whatever other language speaker, just being there and, oh, pretty water and so on, of course. But how has your, let's say, that deeper understanding of the culture of the language itself helped you understand the culture as well? And have you found anything unexpected? That, oh, people say it's XYZ, but actually talking with the people and listening to them, it's ABC?
hmm I think that's a great question because language and culture go hand in hand. And you have to, in order to understand a language thoroughly, you should understand the culture and how it operates. Um, it's kind of, and I think that when you first hear that, you might not understand it, but as you learn the language and the culture, you start to understand how they go hand in hand. Um, I mean, before I went to Mexico for my study abroad, it was more, I would call it like a cultural exchange because I wasn't in school. It was during the summer. It was a 6-week stay. But before we did that, we had 2 days in Houston, Texas to get to learn about the culture. So kind of like do's and don'ts. What would you do that would offend somebody versus like,
Those are always
like,
good.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. So like walking around the house with your shoes on or with your shoes off in Mexico could seem like dirty in a way, like it's impolite. So you want to have like house shoes that you wear. Whereas like in the US, when you come in the house, you take your shoes off. So that would be, it's like an opposite kind of thing. So just learning little things like that, it's really, to me, it's really fascinating. It opens your eyes, it broadens your horizons. Um, yeah, so ask me the question again, because I feel like there's more I could say, but I don't, what did you ask again?
Definitely. I'm wondering how your knowledge of the language, I mean Spanish specifically in our case, has helped you deepen your knowledge of the culture itself.
Yeah. So I just, it's just, yeah, like they go hand in hand. So it's kind of like as you learn the language, you learn the culture. And that's how it should be, in my opinion. Like, with my Spanish teacher in high school, she would always tell us little anecdotes, whether it's a personal anecdote or just about the culture in general. Even learning about food, it's like at this point now, I know so much. I kind of am like, when I teach it to students, I'm like, did they already know this? But then I find out like, no, they don't. Because it's like so familiar to me. I'm like, oh, wait, am I teaching something they know? But no, they don't. So I remember like my Spanish teacher teaching us about flan. Do you know what flan is?
Hmm.
So that was like, oh, a dessert. And then I actually going to Mexico and tasting flan, I'm like, I learned about this in class. So it's really cool to experience if students get the chance to go to the country where they're learning the language. It's just a really fun, exciting experience. But yeah, they go hand in hand, and when you're learning that language, um, you got to learn about the culture, and I absolutely did. Some of it you can learn in the classroom, some of it you learn while you're there. I even think like the way people operate, um, when you learn a language, like let's say in America, we may be perceived as more direct. So in Spanish speaking countries, if you're that direct, it might be offensive. So just learning things like that, it helps you navigate a culture. It helps you learn how to communicate better in general with people and have more diplomatic conversations and understanding of each other. So yeah.
Would you say, Nikki, that your communication skills in general have improved as a result of,
Yeah.
like you said, learning Spanish and then learning more about English as a result of that?
Yeah, and I think it set me up for success too when I was contracted with companies in China and in Taiwan. Um, it really helped me know how to navigate the Asian way of life. I learned a ton about their culture too. I did take some Mandarin classes along the way. Now, don't ask me anything because I don't know Mandarin, but I may be able to say a couple things, but that's about it. But yeah, it definitely helped me navigate that system and culture because I had Spanish in my background and had that understanding of culture. A lot of times, like I almost feel like I could be a mediator or a diplomat because of what I've learned along the way. Like I feel like I could maybe even do negotiation because of that. So yeah, um, it's a really interesting thing. It's something that I haven't really like delved into, but I'd be interested in learning more about that kind of work. So
And is there still something that you are improving in your Spanish? Do you still see some lacks that, okay, I'd love to read about, I don't know, psychology or about something, and that there's still something that you're learning in Spanish? Or would you say that you've reached the quote unquote end?
no way. No
No,
way. You can't even say that with your native language,
no,
right?
no.
There's always a new vocabulary word you can learn, even in your native language. And with Spanish, I mean, there was part of me that wanted to, or still wants to, live abroad in a Spanish speaking country again, because there's colloquialisms that I think I could fine tune. Because a lot of my learning was in the classroom. High school, college was in the classroom. College was immersive, but it's still academic Spanish. It's much more academic Spanish that I speak rather than street Spanish. So that's an area I could work on.
I love your response, and I feel like this is something that a lot of people could benefit from hearing that, like you said, it's not that, okay, obviously you speak your native language well, but you can always improve it. And it's the exact same thing with your second language and expecting yourself to be quote unquote perfect or to know everything or something like that. It's just incredibly unrealistic.
Yeah, and at the middle school before I quit, that was the last place I worked at. I worked there for 4 years and I co-taught dual language. So it was primarily in Spanish. And a lot of the students were native Spanish speakers. They grew up like simultaneously bilingual because they have English and Spanish. They have Spanish at home, English at school. Um, so, in that environment, you could basically say I was exposed because maybe my Spanish isn't even as good as the students. I am fluent, but I would say I'm near native like, especially with grammar. But like I said, with colloquialisms, there I have more to learn there. So with my students, a lot of times teachers kind of want to like hide that. But I think like because I was honest with them, I say, oh, like I'm not sure how to say that word. How do you guys say that? They have so much more respect for me because I was honest with them. So if you're a teacher finding yourself in that position, don't be afraid to just say, you know what? I don't know XYZ. Let's discover it together, or come back next week and tell me, like if you're seeing them on a weekly basis or whatever it is. Don't be afraid to do that.
And would you say that this comes back to what you were telling us before with your personality, that you were always just super open, putting yourself out there that, hey, I don't know this, and that's okay?
I would say that probably came more from experience,
Mm,
because maybe in the beginning, like my first years of teaching, I would have tried to act like I know something or whatever. But then just finding out along the way, like, no, this is how you get the respect. Just being open about where you're at with the language. Yeah, I mean, I've always been like an honest person, but when you're up in front of the classroom and you feel vulnerable doing that, especially as a beginner, like a first year teacher, you're like, I have to be this way or whatever.
of course.
So just experience taught me that.
And what would you say has been the most valuable lesson that you've learned along the way in terms of your teaching?
Hmm. Um, Most valuable lesson just comes probably from my students, learning from them and hearing about different life stories and seeing how they learn and how they like to learn, what teaching strategies I use that are um, that make an impact. Um, so yeah, but I teach because I love working with students and seeing them succeed and learn, and having that rapport with them. So I would always say that like it has to do with what the students teach me and what I learned from them.
That's a very big part of it. You're definitely
Mhm.
right. And I'd love to dig a little bit deeper into what you said, Nikki, with building rapport. What would you say is your, because I'm sure that you're finding this over the years, but I'm wondering if that skill has also, let's say, flooded into your, let's say, quote unquote, normal life, just working with regular people, I don't know, going to a restaurant or a cafe or meeting somebody. What would you say has been the most beneficial thing that you've learned in terms of building rapport, whether with students or just with other people in your life as well?
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And I think this also connects to what we were saying earlier, like how you build empathy through learning another language. So, and I know that term, like empathy is kind of an overused word these days, but it is the truth. So, that had a huge impact on me with co-teaching with teachers in the middle school because there were definitely teachers who maybe weren't open to having me in their classroom, or they maybe they just didn't want me there at all. So that was another thing I had to learn how to navigate. Actually, I had to, kind of like just first build the rapport, first build the relationship with them, that trust, and establish that before I could even offer my skill set to them. So that is absolutely true. Um, that I've learned how to have better relationships and communication with people because of the language. And maybe it is personality too. Um, but I think all the experiences kind of that molded me into who I am as an individual, all the language learning experiences and cultural experiences.
Do you have any practical tips for anybody that maybe doesn't feel that they're good at building relationships? And I suppose, especially if we speak of a second language, but also even if you're an introvert, then it might be difficult in your first language. Do you have any practical tips that, okay, do this or ask this kind of question? What's your go-to?
Yeah. Surprisingly, I consider myself an introvert. On the Myers-Briggs, I'm a INFP, but I could see myself as an ENFP sometimes too. Um, so I guess I'm kind of like that person that's like an outgoing, it sounds like an oxymoron, like I'm an outgoing introvert,
Yeah.
but I prefer like smaller groups. I prefer conversations like this. When I get into big crowds or parties or whatever, I get drained. So that's where the I side comes in. The E side comes in with like I'm outgoing. So, but get back to your question with tips for communicating or like putting yourself out there, start small. If you're learning a language, you know, practice in the mirror. Maybe feels awkward, but you could have a conversation with yourself. um, like one of the tips I give people with video, like if you're thinking, oh, I want to make a YouTube channel. So one of my tips with that is just record yourself without putting it out there. So you get used to being on camera. So anything you can do by yourself first or with a friend you trust first, and then just taking baby steps. It's always stepping
Mm,
stones. There's like a way that people do public speaking or like getting over fears. They do
right.
like those little things, like one little thing at a time, because you're kind of getting your nervous system used to it before you just full blown go out and do something. So it's that kind of thing.
Baby steps for sure.
Yeah.
And that makes a lot of sense, like you said. And I feel like a lot of it is just in the back of your head somewhere, like you said, speaking to yourself, oh no, but what if somebody sees me? That would be very
Exactly.
creepy to begin with. Somebody was looking through your window. But you gotta start somewhere, like you said.
Yeah.
And do you think a good place to start is, like you said, maybe with a friend, maybe not necessarily a teacher? I feel like a lot of people get that little bit of anxiety that, okay, oh, they're gonna hear my mistakes and they're going to correct everything. So do you think it's a good start with maybe a friend or with somebody that's not, let's say, quote unquote, professional? Or is that not
Mhm.
necessarily a good start? What do you think?
And one of the experiences that I had in Spain is an intercambio, which is like an exchange between you and a native speaker. So they set us up with locals that we could meet up with that wanted to practice their English. So we would do like 1 hour of English, 1 hour of Spanish. So you're kind of in the same boat together. So if you could find that kind of situation where you're both learning, then you feel much more comfortable because you know, oh, this person's also learning.
I've heard a lot of stories from my students because I love recommending this as well. You know, find a language partner, just a chatting partner, a friend. And then a lot of people come back to me and they say, oh, yeah, we ended up speaking just whatever other language the entire time, and I didn't get to practice my English. And I've heard a lot
You
of
have to
sad stories. So,
set the
like you
rules
said,
first.
yeah.
Set the rules because when you say, okay, let's do one hour of this, the other hour of that, you just know that's what you're going to switch to. And if it's, you have to respect each other too. So try to find somebody who has that equal respect. And if it's not, then you go on to the next person and see if they respect your time too, you know?
And like you said, I mean, it's an exchange, right? So, like you said, having that somebody that has something that can help you and you having something that can help somebody else. And I suppose what you said is a perfect summary to that, that if you don't like them, then just find somebody else.
Yes. Exactly. I did it with three different people, I think.
Okay.
So, yeah, and like one of them maybe wasn't, for me or I wasn't for her or whatever.
Yeah.
So then like finding somebody who is really as committed as I was, and also like, can we converse about something that both interests us, you know? So yeah, there definitely has to be somewhat of a friendship there too, if you can find that.
Which is a good point, finding that common ground.
Yeah,
Certainly.
exactly.
Certainly. And tell me, Nikki, is there anything else that I didn't ask you? Anything else that you would like to say? Any pieces of wisdom that you'd like to share?
I would just say, go out there and get it. Go out there and get it. Don't give up. Um, Language learning has its peaks and valleys, just like we were talking about with entrepreneurship. So when you're in that low point of, oh man, this is so hard, I can't get to this next level, just don't give up. Keep going.
For anybody listening, if they want to learn Spanish with you or if they just want to listen to what you have to say, where can people find you?
Go to skillabration.com. It's skill, Skillabration, because learning a language is a skill and a celebration.
It certainly is. Certainly is. Well, thank you very
Yep.
much, Nikki. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you today. You shared some really incredible tips, and I'm sure everybody's going to find it helpful.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk to you too.
Hey, I'm glad to see you here. Let me know what you most enjoyed about this conversation, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one. Do zobaczenia.